Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming.
Howdy, folks, and welcome back to the Line of Sight podcast. Today, my guest is the man behind Miniature Game Montage, Jimmy. He's going to here to talk to us about all different kinds of aspects of tabletop gaming, YouTube channels, all that great stuff. Jimmy, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's start the way I start every single one of my my podcast interviews. Tell me, how did you get into tabletop wargaming?
So I didn't get in officially, I would say, until I was much older in life. I had some dealings with it when I was a kid. I got into Warhammer Fantasy. I remember, just begging my parents to get me this box of plastic miniatures. This goes back into the 90s, I think, and just how against it they were because they were little plastic miniatures. And they couldn't
Okay.
they couldn't imagine even back then, paying that kind of money to get this box of figures. But I ended up finally getting a box, which I have on my shelf behind me in my videos, and it is the looks like the high elves and the goblins. So I'm
Oh,
not sure.
Isle of Blood, was that what that one was called? I can't remember.
Um, this one I don't I'm not sure. I don't think it was the Isle of Blood. It's not labeled as such.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I've still got the box behind me. So I kind of got into it then, and then quickly fell out because I didn't have anyone to play with, and I tried to paint miniatures up, and I at the time had no idea that wash and shade existed.
Yeah.
So they just didn't look really good by any means, and quickly what I saw, as the box and what I had envisioned in my head wasn't coming to fruition, on the tabletop, if that makes sense.
Oh, sure, and I mean, you and I are both old enough to remember the days long before YouTube painting tutorials. You either had someone physically show you, or you learned by a lot of trial and error.
That's right. So I played other games. Christmas time I would get a game. Battle Masters. I finally remember playing Battle Masters. I remember
Nice.
playing Hero Quest, and I actually still have these games in my garage. And
Yep.
then there's another game called Dark World that I think was made by Mattel. So I kind of played miniature games a lot as a kid, but I never really got into the hobby. As when I got into high school, I was involved in a lot of sports. I went to college and all of that. I really didn't get back into wargaming until I'd gotten married, and it was probably around 2012, 2011, somewhere in that area where I finally said, "Hey, look, I'm going to go and buy." I think at the time it was 40K sixth edition. So I did that, and I actually got really into Flames of War because there was a big local group that played Flames of War. So I got into that as well, and yeah, the rest is kind of history.
Yeah. Well, and I noticed looking over your channel, you have quite a spread. It seems you try out lots and lots of different games. You've got historical on there, you've got fantasy, you've got sci-fi, you've all over the place. I did notice that you really hone in on Necromunda. That seems to be your forte. Tell me about that. Why is Necromunda seem to be the game that you really gravitate to? At least based on what I saw on your channel.
Yeah, Necromunda, we try to play pretty consistently. One is it's how my channel started. I saw Necromunda. It was during COVID, and my I was with my son, and they were wanting to play electronics, tablets, pretty much all the time. And Necromunda as a 2D game, just kind of that top-down board view, I paid it absolutely no interest when it just had the bulkheads on the board, and you would kind of move figures around, and the columns or the walls would just be like little dark spaces on the board. That really didn't interest me at all. I just kind of glanced right over it. But when I saw Dark Uprising, when that came out and Necromunda kind of got that reboot, if you will, in a 3D world, that really I was like, "Oh my gosh." I was like, "That looks incredible." And, the lighting that they had and the miniatures kinda, just moving in the darkness and across the tabletop, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is really cool. I'd like to get into this." So, I talked about it with my son. He was really young at the time, but he was like, "Yeah, wouldn't it be cool if we did some videos and put them on YouTube?" I said, we can definitely do that. So I kind of took it on as just a little project for us to kind of do to get them away from electronics and things like that. And as the following kind of grew and the input kind of grew, we kept going with it, and I fell in love with it. I found that Necromunda allows me to tell a story on the tabletop, which I think I enjoy more than anything. I like to tell the story, and you never know what's going to happen because the dice rolls, you just don't know. So I enjoy that aspect of it, not just rolling dice for the result and hey, look, my unit shot your unit. It's the rolling the dice and oh my gosh, you hit this guy. He fell off a catwalk and then plummeted. He didn't get injured by the shot, but he fell to his death. I think that's really cool.
No, that I agree with you. It's almost like you're watching the movie and you don't know what's going to happen next, and so there's that interest of you're controlling the game, but at the same time, there's still a lot of unknown, and you just get to enjoy it as you play through it. So does it seem then you gravitate to more the skirmish games? Is that where you think you tell the stories better versus like larger like 40K or Warhammer Fantasy or something like that? Does the is the skirmish because you play more with your son and he was young, or
No, the skirmish just more fits for timing and the amount of time
okay.
that it takes to get a faction ready. And
Yeah,
I
that's
I, l-
true.
I look at it from you take Warhammer 40K or Warhammer Fantasy. It would take me 3-4 months to get a faction ready to play, just a smaller game, probably, 500,000 points. I mean, that's how long it would probably take me to get that faction painted up. Whereas when I look at a skirmish game, I like to play a lot of different factions because if you're nobody wants to see just the same people going against each other constantly. They want to see a variety. So instead of taking that 3-4 months to paint up a 500, 1040K army, I could have, 5 or 6 different skirmish factions painted up. And it just fits easier for the timeline. You look at Play On, I think they do a great job telling a narrative and a story with their 40K battle reports that they do, and a lot of the other ones as well. But the skirmish format just tends to fit what we do. If I had a studio or if I had multiple people behind me that were willing to paint and play and all of that, it would probably be a different story. But with it being just me and my son helping out occasionally, it just the skirmish games just fit that much better.
Oh, I can absolutely relate. As one man channels, I mean, you're doing everything. You're prepping, you're painting, you're filming, you're editing. It's you never realize how much goes into those videos you see on YouTube until you started making them, and then
That's
you
right.
realize that a 45-minute battle report or 1 hour battle report video takes like 8 hours total to get everything done and ready. So yeah, I
Absolutely right.
absolutely feel there. And I get you with the idea of the skirmish allows you to explore a bit more. When Kill Team came out the first time, I think it was back in, well, re-released the first time back in 2018. The one thing I really loved about that is if I wanted to try a new faction, I just had to buy one box of models. That's it. Whereas, like you said, if you want to start a new army in 40K or Sigmar or Fantasy or something like that, you're almost getting married all over again. You're committing to months of building and painting before you can finally see anything on the tabletop.
That's right.
So,
And then you've got to learn to play that faction. There's a lot that goes into the larger style games, and I think as the gaming demographic gets older, which I think we are getting older, I don't think young people, and this is just my personal view, I don't see a ton of young people coming into the hobby. When I got started into the hobby as a younger person, it just seems like that a lot of people out there are older gamers, and they're now getting married, having children, jobs, responsibilities, all that stuff. It's so much easier to play an hour and a half to 2 hour skirmish game and it actually be that 2 hour format versus saying 2 hours and it really takes four.
yeah, yeah.
uh,
Oh, yeah. That's when you sit down for a game of 40K, you're booking an evening. And if you've ever played an apocalypse game, you're booking a whole weekend. So,
Right. And it seems like they've always said, "Hey, look, this should be a 2-hour game." And I guess it is in tournaments if you really know what's going on. But for casual players, you're constantly referencing stuff and going out and back, and you want to have some chit chat with your opponent too. It's really like an entire evening. I mean, it's a 4 to 5 hour deal.
Yeah, once you break out the turn clocks to make things move, then you passed out of the realm of casual enjoyment, and there's an entirely different focus on the game. So, when you're since you've experienced, you test out a lot of different games. How do you decide which ones you want to play and which ones not? I mean, nowadays there's an abundance of different games, even if you just limit to say just skirmish games. So, how do you pick which ones you're going to test out, put on your channel? What leads you to different choices?
Yeah, so there are a handful that are kind of I would call staple type of games, such as Necromunda. We've got a campaign going on for that, so I do try to get one Necromunda video a month if I can, just to be sure that we're continuing that campaign because there's a lot of people invested in it, and there's a lot of people that want to see the conclusion. So I do my best to weave that in once a month. Kill Team is another game that I've always tried to give some focus to, just because I enjoy the game. I think the rules are really good. It's well written, not so much balanced, but the rules are really good, and it's an easy game to play and edit if that makes sense. I don't have to. That's a game where I can put down and just play a game and have fun, and I don't really have to worry about that interweaving narrative so much. And then
Interesting.
other games such as you take Bolt Action. I do enjoy Bolt Action. So if I haven't played a game in a while, then I kind of look at what I've done and say, hey, look, I want to try to weave this game in the next few weeks or so if I can. So there's a lot of games that kind of flex in and out. Flames of War being one of those. I was on my computer yesterday, and my son comes in and he's like, "Hey, look, when are we going to play Relic Blade again?" So my son has some input on that too.
Well, that's fantastic. So then, bit of a transition here. Since the majority of the people who listen to my podcast and watch my channel, they're big one-page rules players. So you have dabbled in that a little bit. Tell me, how did you come across one-page rules as a gaming system?
So one page rules. I'm trying to remember how I actually found out about it. I mean, I remember I'm in the Discord, and I've been kind of following one page rules for quite some time. We have played some Grimdark Future on the channel, as I just found at the time that it's just so much easier to play than Warhammer 40K, and I'll use that as kind of the alternative that we were playing prior to that. And I actually just don't even really play Warhammer 40K anymore because while I love the lore and I love the universe that they've created, I don't particularly like the rules. The constant rerolls really drive me nuts. And even when this new edition came out, I played maybe 2 games, and I was my Dark Angels, and it's like roll, and you get to re-roll all your hits, and then you roll, and you get to re-roll all your wounds,
Yeah.
and then you're left with these results. And I just said, "Hey, look, you know what? Maybe this isn't for me right now." And that's been happening for years, and I've just turned more to one-page rules, Grimdark Future specifically for my alternative, and which I've really liked because one page rules, they're very easy, they're very clean, and it's a bolt on system. And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand about OPR is that while the core game is extremely simple, easy to learn, and quick, you can bolt on a ton of variants that has all been created, even some by the community, that makes it much more of what you would be looking for if you're one of those people that really wants that tactical grit in a war game. So yeah, I've really liked it. I would love to do more. And now that I have a 3D printer, I'm going to be maybe looking to pick up some of the fantasy aspect of OPR and putting that on the channel.
Well, so when you said you played Grimdark Future, you're talking the full size games. Have you tried the skirmish size, the Grimdark Future Firefight at all?
I have not tried Firefight, and that's because mainly my channel was kind of built on Necromunda, and then it's got a big kill team following as well. So
Mhm.
I haven't really deviated from that formula too much to
Okay.
do the firefight.
Well, because you play so many of these skirmish games, I would really be curious to maybe a few months, a bit later down the road, to talk to you about it if you were to try it out. Because one thing I'm personally I'm finding is like you, I find one page rules to be this great alternative to 40K to play large scale battles. Like you want to see 100 or so models, you want to reenact something really grandiose. One page rules is fantastic for that. Then when you narrow down to the skirmish, I'm still trying to figure out where one page rules fits in there. Since the rule set doesn't change that much, you're still playing the same thing just on a smaller scale. And so I'm starting to test out other skirmish games to see, okay, what do they offer that maybe one page rules doesn't. So I'd be very curious, maybe in a few months to see if you've had a chance to play and to test it out again. Because like you, I like how the skirmish games, they lend themselves more to storytelling. Like you'll give each of your characters, each of your models a name, whereas
Right.
you don't do that with a 40K army. You'll give maybe your heroes and maybe some sergeants or something, but you're not going to. Every model on the table does not have a backstory,
That's
and that
right.
seems to be what really drives it. I am not a competitive player. I suck at playing. I usually don't do very well, but the narrative side, I really enjoy that. As you said, you did. So then let's see here. I I think it was on one of your models. Are you going to get into Trench Crusade or one of your videos mentioning it?
Yeah, so I have a few videos on Trench Crusade that are up. One was, gosh, it goes back 8 or 9, maybe even further months ago. But it's kind of what is Trench Crusade? I mean, I found out about Trench Crusade early in 2024. Was like, oh man, this is going to be really cool. And at the time, I had no idea it was going to become what it has become. I mean, over a $4 million Kickstarter. I bought a 3D printer specifically for Trench Crusade and some OPR stuff too. But it was I had Trench Crusade on my mind when I pushed the the purchase button, and I've already printed out 2 factions. I've got a painting video on one of those factions that's already up. I plan to do a painting video on the next one, and then get some terrain painted. And we plan to go full in on a Trench Crusade campaign. So, absolutely looking forward to that game.
So when you first saw about it, was it the models? Was it the? Did you look at it and say, "Hey, that's some great stories"? Um, what drew you into it? Because obviously you sound like you're really. I mean, you're jumping in with both feet. You bought a 3D printer to do that. So when you saw Trench Crusade, what pulled you in?
So the first thing that pulled me in is we had just gotten into Mordheim and had played a few games of Mordheim, and I believe I found out about Trench Crusade through the Mordheim Facebook group, and then I found out that Thomas Perrin, the gentleman who did Mordheim, had also was also working on Trench Crusade, and I thought, wow, we've really enjoyed Mordheim. This has to be something great, and I ended up forming a relationship with Thomas and kind of talking to him about it, and he made a cameo in one of my earlier videos on what is Trench Crusade. Fantastic guy. So I just I can't even remember how that happened. I think I reached out to him just to say, hey, thanks. I plan to make a video on this. It seems like you guys are really doing something special. And he was like, well, let me give you something to put at the beginning of it.
That's awful
So
nice.
yeah, I mean, it was just really cool. So I got that relationship with him, and he came and said, I think this is my best rule set that I've ever created. And I said, "Well, okay, that's definitely something because Mordheim, hasn't been supported from Games Workshop for decades, still has a thriving community and a thriving following. And plus, when I looked more into what Trench Crusade is, it is gamers making a game for people that enjoy gaming. It's not people in a boardroom that have shareholders to make happy or anything like that. It's a bunch of guys that have full time jobs. And when that's done, they come and work on something that they're passionate about, and they're passing that on to people that are going to enjoy it.
And I think that's also what why I think partly why GW is kind of in some ways they're falling off the boat, and why companies like One Page Rules are doing a bit better. One Page Rules is one guy. Now, obviously, he's got others helping him, but it started as a passion project of sorts that managed to then grow into something a whole lot bigger. Whereas, as you put it, GW, I actually made a video about this just a couple weeks ago. GW is now officially blue chip stock. They have reached that level of success as far as corporate, where they're now considered one of the top 100 companies on the London Stock Exchange.
Right.
And as you point out, the concern there is they're no longer making decisions based on what's good for the game, but what's good for the company, what's good for the business, and those two don't necessarily always line up, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, no, that's right, and there's not a whole lot that's going to be that's going to change that. I mean, I read and I see all of the people that like to say, it's always the clickbait, YouTube
Right.
thumbnails, the death of Games Workshop and all this. That is a train that's rolling fast and hard. There's not a lot that's going to be that can be done to slow it down, because you look at the universe and the world that they've created, all of the money that can be made from the rights to that, whether that's from Amazon Studios, movies, digital assets. I mean,
Yeah.
they have created something that is massive and uh, it's very expensive. So,
Yes. Yes. And to think, though, at one point they were the small company that few people had heard about, and so there's this interesting balance that you want. Like, I want one page rules to grow and become huge in groups like Trench Crusade, because the bigger it is, the more likely you can find other people to play. So you can move anywhere, at least in the United States, and there'll be a 40K gaming community, almost guaranteed.
right.
Whereas you might not find someone who plays Necromunda or Mordheim or one page rules or something like that. So I want to have my cake and eat it too. I want the games to grow big enough that they're well established, but not so big that they then lose sight of what it is exactly they're trying to do here. But
Right.
while we're wishing, there's a lot of stuff I'd like. So let me switch back, go back to previously with. I've tried playing Necromunda a couple times, and maybe it's just I've been playing one page rules a whole lot. I found Necromunda to be very, very heavy on
Oh yeah.
rules and details and things like that. So I found that interesting when you said that you didn't like the rules in 40K, like the excessive rerolling, but you really like Necromunda. So could you clarify a little bit? Why is it that in Necromunda, that really dense set of rules draws you in, whereas in something like 40K, the dense rules were what pushed you out?
Yeah, for me, I think that, I mean, one, there's no rerolls in Necromunda. The result is the result. So once the die leaves your hand, that's what it is. I mean, there's a tactics card that may give you one reroll a game, but when you let go, the result is the result, and there's no changing it. So
It's unforgiving.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it is what it is, and I do like that. But I guess the way that I found it different is that I am probably, well, I have never played D&D. I've never looked into it. I've never been in a group. I've never read any of the books. I have nothing to do with D&D. I am I think I'm one of those players at heart. And Necromunda, I think, is almost a blend between maybe like that D&D kind of atmosphere and a war game. And I think when I get involved from that aspect, when I'm attached to my characters and the battles actually matter from one battle to the next. People can die, they can get injured, and you get invested in their stories. That kind of trumps whatever crunchiness there may be in the rules.
Okay. Now that actually surprises me quite a bit, because for mentioning that you're really drawn into stories. I mean, D&D is playing out stories. Is it you never had the opportunity, or when the opportunity arose, it didn't it just didn't, I don't know what's the word, didn't pull you in, but that's really surprising that D&D you've never really touched on. Is that something you might do later, or do you think you're good with everything else you got right now?
I have so much on my plate now to where I don't think that it's even in the realm of possibility that I could do it. But I made a blog post on my website, miniaturegamemontage.com, for anybody that wants to check that out. But I made a blog post on more or less how I was kind of like a closet war gamer. If that makes sense. I was one of those people, kind of growing up. I was very involved with sports and things like that, but the people that I kept in my social circle, I didn't really let them know what I was doing. When I would, get miniatures and stuff like that, because I didn't think that they would understand. And
Mm.
and that's on me. And that's even continued, through my adulthood, and even until the last few years, I have finally got the courage to say, yeah, I collect and paint miniatures. And when people used to come over to the house, I used to frantically, scramble to put things away, put my painting stuff away, and put my miniatures away, because I know it's weird, and a lot of people may not understand it, but I just didn't think that the people in my social circle would understand what I was doing, and I have really broken free from that. And even in my wife said, as 2025, the new year rolled around, she said, it's time for you to just let it go, and just post things that you want to on Facebook, and just be who you are.
That's well, it's actually not as weird as you might think. There was a guy who used to come to. There's a Warhammer store where I live, and um, he very much got into it. He had a couple armies. He was there at least once a week, and then he got a promotion at work that required him to start wearing a shirt and tie rather than just whatever. And he quit playing. And when we got a chance to talk to him, we're like, dude, you don't come by anymore. What's not going on? And I don't recall word for word, but he said something to the effect of, I'm running in a higher level crowd now. I can't have hobbies like this. And that just struck me as very, very odd, especially when you find out that like the guys who do South Park, they play. Robin Williams, he played.
Right,
Henry
right.
Cavill, he played. It's like,
Vin Diesel,
like it's no longer. I get it that if you grew up as we did, back in '80s, '90s, and what have you, yeah, it was the super nerdy thing. Like as soon as someone found out that you collected and played with and painted little guys, and even as you said, when you got older, the first time after I got married, so I'm in my early to mid 20s, and some of my in-laws came over to the house, and I had all my painting stuff out on the table, and this one guy, he looks at it and he gives me this look, and everyone who's had this look knows this look, and it's the look
Right.
of how old are you and what are you doing? And he made a comment. This was so at first I was, I wouldn't say ashamed, but I was a little embarrassed. But then he said something that totally made me like, all right, I can dismiss this 100%. He said, "You sure have a lot of extra money." Now, at first, that's kind of funny because he's absolutely right about that. But this was a guy who owned a boat, two quad runners, and like all of these really expensive boy toys, so to speak.
Right.
And I'm like, and you're telling me I'm spending too much on little plastic things? Like, dude, every time you go out on that boat, you spend more in gas than I spend on what you see on this table here. But it is interesting that you mentioned that over time the hobby has become more acceptable. Uh,
Yeah, and the good news is I've got a very supporting wife, and she wants me to, be who I am, and it's fantastic, because when people come over, a lot of people in my social circle, they want to talk about golf, which I play golf too, as a side hobby as well, but they want to talk about investing. They want to talk about, I guess you could say, more adult stuff, and I would love to have more people that came over and just wanted to talk about the hobby. you
Now,
know
have you got your wife to play at all?
So she is not so into it. I have got her to sit down and play. There's a battle report on my channel. Gosh, what was that? I can't remember the game. It was a cowboy themed game that we played. So she has done that, and then she also played a game of Blitz Bowl, which is, I want to say, like a Barnes and Noble exclusive, a slimmed down version of Blood
A
Bowl.
Blood Bowl, yeah.
So she's played that as well, and we had a really good time, and we'll do another battle report of that. I think me and her in the future, but she has not gotten into anything beyond that.
Now that's funny you mentioned that because likewise, I tried to get my wife into 40K, and that was too much. But she played when I bought Blood Bowl, she was willing to play that because she was a big sports fan.
Right.
When we lived back in Texas, she huge Texas A&M fan, and so to kind of coax her into it, I bought a Blood Bowl starter set and I painted the humans as Texas A&M and I painted the orc team as UT so we could have the classic rivalry.
Nice.
And she was willing to play that. And then when we found that One Page Rules did a variation of Blood Bowl, they called it Death Ball. And just like with their main game set, it took Blood Bowl and simplified it so that the goal was getting the game fast, very, very much back and forth, and you can play a game in 45 minutes to an hour.
Right.
And she loved playing that. I even got my 9-year-old daughter was even willing to play a game of Death Ball because it was fast enough and simple enough that she could focus on throwing dice and moving models and having fun. And yeah, there may have been a little bit of thinking and strategy, but it was more the enjoyment side of it.
Right.
So what do you think it is that has made it more acceptable now to be in the hobby? Like just well, go ahead.
Well, you know, I know that like Stranger Things has been out for gosh, a decade now. There's been a lot more I guess light shined on the fantasy aspects, Game of Thrones. You look at sci-fi. There's a lot more people now than I think there were back in the 80s and 90s that would say, "Hey, man, gosh, I love sci-fi, or I love fantasy," and that's because there's been so many novels, so many TV shows that have come out and really kind of mainstreamed it and really
Mm.
brought in. Then this is my personal view, just brought in that audience. So now it is just seen as something more accepting. Like you look at Stranger Things and what I think did to D&D. I mean, it really there's so many people out there that maybe had no clue about it, but now they're interested in what that is just because of that.
So we were ahead of our time, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
The rest of the
absolutely
world
right.
hadn't caught up. Because if you remember, for those of you who remember or have seen ET, at the beginning of it, the guys are sitting around a table playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
And what's curious is everybody remembers, as far as product placement, everyone who watched ET remembers Reese's Pieces. Like that took off.
Right.
But nobody knew what the heck the guys were doing. It's just they're sitting around a table and they got all these pads of paper and stuff, but it just didn't fit. Whereas, as you said, when Stranger Things comes out, it's the exact same thing. There's a little more focus on it, but it's almost like the nerdy guys like us who were kind of the social outcasts
It's
are
normalized.
now, yeah, we're now adults, and some of our generation are very famous, and so when people admire them for their other talents, and then when they say, "Oh yeah, by the way, I played Dungeons and Dragons, I played Warhammer," and suddenly, society's going, "Oh well, I can't really mock you because you're rich and famous, but that is kind of a weird hobby," and it almost forced them to take another look at it,
Right. I
and
mean, you,
now
you
it's
look at the 40K games that have come out over the last few decades, whether that be Space Marine. I know that's had a huge influence on maybe people coming into the hobby. But there's been a ton of other games too. Vermintide. There's been just a ton of games that have really, I think, brought in some of people that would have never given it a second look. So as it's become more mainstream, and we all knew back then that we were just having a great time, and people just didn't understand,
yeah.
the great time that we were having, and now they're starting to, I think, see it.
Yeah, I know once when I was painting something and I had a battle report up playing in the background, and my wife came up and she watched it for a few minutes, and she said, "You're watching these guys play the game," and I said, "Yeah, well, I like seeing their list building. I like seeing their paint schemes. It helps refresh the rules and stuff." And she's like, "Well, why not play it?" She didn't make that connection. And then a few days later, I walk into the house and she's watching football on TV. And I walked up to her and I said, "So you're watching a bunch of guys play a game?" And she kind of gave me this look. I'm like,
That's
"Point
funny.
made." And then I walked off from there. But we had our fun, but that was that. So what's on the horizon then for your channel? You said you got a Necromunda campaign that's kind of like long term working with that. What other stuff do you have planned?
Yeah, so my major bottleneck is painting. Because
Mhm.
it's me and my son. So I try to I've got so much I need to paint. And
Well, who doesn't? I mean, it's the pile
right,
of shame.
right. Necromunda. So we're getting ready to wind down a a long Necromunda campaign. It's been ongoing for probably 2 years now, getting close to that. So we'll be winding that down, and there will be a winner, and all of that. And then I will need a little bit of downtime to paint up the Hive Secundus box. So we will start a Hive Secundus campaign, which is only going to be like a 6 game campaign. So it's going to be a little shorter. I thought that in doing the longer campaigns that it would just kind of, uh, be a little easier. But what I have found is as Necromunda gets more support, Games Workshop's been moving a little faster than our campaign.
Mm. Yeah.
So we'll
Okay.
do a Hive Secundus campaign. So you look forward to that in 2025. We'll be doing more Kill Team. I actually just found a friend locally that has gotten into Kill Team, and he wants to paint up more teams. We actually had a game that was on the channel. I got completely stomped, but he wants to do more Kill Team. He's willing to paint up some more factions to play, and I'm really excited about that. We have Trench Crusade. I've got two of the 6 or so war bands printed. One of those war bands is fully painted, and the other one is just waiting for paint. So that'll be done relatively quickly. Trench Crusade will be a big one. We're going to continue with a newer game that we just introduced called the Silver Bayonet.
Yes,
Um,
I have played the Silver Bayonet. It's such a cool setting.
yeah, so I didn't know too much about it until I saw Peachy Tips. I saw Peachy play the Silver Bayonet in his narrative format, and I was really just taken back by it. I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." So I got into Silver Bayonet,
So
and then
for
that
those
kind
of
of
you sorry, for those of you who aren't familiar, think, for Silver Bayonet, think of Napoleonic era warfare, but mixed with the fantasy elements of monsters and vampires and werewolves and such. So a skirmish game where your basic soldier has, a black powder musket, but he's actually fighting against, supernatural. So almost like Trench Crusade and the War of
right.
1812 got together. But sorry, I cut you off.
Oh no, no, totally good. So yeah, it's totally right. The fairy tales of Europe have come to life. So we've got Trench Crusade, Blackout. We'll continue doing some Blackout videos as well because it's really quick skirmish game, very tactical, very deadly. I've been
That's
enjoying
modern
that.
war, right?
It is, yeah. It's modern war, but not too modern. It's like they still have vehicles on wheels and stuff like that.
Okay.
So yeah, really looking forward to doing more Blackout. And then I've got some games that are on the horizon. We'll continue doing Bolt Action, Flames of War, weaving those in. But there's J.J. McCullough's universe, or Joseph McCullough's universe, I should say. Frostgrave, Stargrave are two
Yep.
games that I'd like to introduce at some point in 2025. I'd like to continue doing Mordheim. And then there's also some other stuff out there. 5 Parsecs from Home. I wouldn't mind taking a look at that game.
Have you
And
played Space Weirdos?
I have not.
So that's one, if you really love the skirmish and the narrative driven aspect, definitely take a look at Space Weirdos. Super cheap to get into. The rule book is $5 and it's model agnostic. So you can take, last time I played Space Weirdos game, the one I just posted on my channel, I used my Delac gang from Necromunda. And so it's a really, really curious system. I've actually plugged this to a lot of the people that have been talking to. But yeah, if you like the narrative skirmish, definitely check that one out.
Is that the tabletop minions and Vince Ventrella?
Nope, nope. I can't remember his name. I reached out to him to see if he'd be willing to come on the podcast to talk, but I haven't heard back yet. No, it's just kind of like one page rules. It's one dude who said, I have an idea for a great game, and he came up with this rule book that's maybe 10 pages or so, and just put it out there, and it took off. I heard about it. Was
Really?
it what's his name? The Tabletop Minions, I think. Adam Smash, that guy. He
Right.
did a video about it, and I saw that and I thought, well, okay, that's nice. I mean, there's a lot of games out there, but then when folks on my channel said you should try this out, I said I was looking for some new skirmish games. I said you should try it out, and I did, and very, very fun, very fast, but still a lot of tactics, a lot of thinking goes into it. Really unique system with the dice of how your dice rolls and benefits and detriments to stuff go in. So I don't want to go in too much detail about it, but yeah, definitely take a look at that if you like narrative skirmish games.
Excellent. I will definitely do that. So I've got those. I've got Gaslands. I've got that rule book that I'd like to
Gaslands, yeah,
bash
Gaslands is
some
great.
cards and do something with that. And then, I've got my 3D printer, so I'd like to introduce some OPR stuff as well. And I want to use the official OPR stuff. So we may get into some Age of Fantasy, and I'd like to print out, official OPR stuff to use in that instead of proxying. So that's kind of my goal. My long term slate this year. I mean, there's so many
Oh,
games that I
good.
even want to try. Fallout Wasteland Warfare is another one.
Yeah, that's on my
Um,
list.
yeah, there's just so many games that I just want to try and just kind of report, do a battle report on how they are.
I'll give you one more recommendation. When you start doing the one-page rules, check out the two Quest games. There's one-page rules Quest, which is a fantasy setting, and then one-page rules Star Quest, which is the sci-fi setting. And you can use any of the models from any of their armies, but they're actually starting to produce STL files specifically for Quest and Star Quest. And it's more, I've described it as almost like Diablo on the tabletop. So you
Mm.
build your team of up to four. You can have up to four people playing, each controlling one, or you and your son could each control two. And so it's very, very narrative. When you create each of those characters, they have a full character sheet of skills, abilities, items, all that stuff. And you work through each mission as if it's a narrative setting. It's not just you have 100 points, I have 100 points, and we duke it out. It's much more like a D&D adventure toned down quite a bit. You have a goal you're trying to accomplish, and there's waves and waves of monsters that you have to fight, but your characters level up and progress as much as you want to play the game. And they've designed it really well so that you could take a level 10 character and join a level 1 character, and the game will still be relatively balanced for them. You won't run into the problem of until you get to a certain level, your characters really can't play together. So that's the last one. I don't want to add too much to your list, but if you're getting into OPR, based on what you said about what kind of games you enjoy, definitely try the Quest.
Excellent. I'll keep my eye out for that.
Sounds good. So we're coming close to our end of time here. So just one other quick question, just out of curiosity: what's the gaming community like around you? Is it pretty big? What seem to be the most popular games? Do you have trouble finding opponents and people to play with? What's the situation like around where you live?
It's a struggle for me just because I live kind of, I hate to say in the middle of nowhere, but it's a pretty good distance to get to my house, I guess, from civilization, if that's what you want to call it.
Right.
We live kind of out in the country, and my I call it a studio. It's my little upstairs room, but it's just difficult to get people to come over and film a game because it's a little bit of a drive to get here versus going to the store. You look at the last Kill Team battle report I did. I actually filmed that in a store, which it's presents its own difficulties to do. But that's what I wanted to do, just to get a game in, and the gentleman wanted to make a battle report with it. So um, I would say that I live in a pretty popular area. It's we discussed that earlier, but for
Right.
me,
Yeah.
it's just quite of a drive to get to where I am, and I find that people either they want to play but not paint, so their army's not painted, or they just want to paint and not play. So that's kind of the people around me right now.
So to be able to play for a video for your channel is a little trickier, but as far as if you just needed to find a pickup game, is the community pretty large? Like you said, there's a local game store nearby. You wouldn't have a problem finding a game there. It's just getting people to make the trek to your house.
Right? Yeah, if they wanted
Okay.
to do a battle report or something like that. So
Okay.
yeah, I guess if I wanted to just get in games casually, there's really not a problem with me going to my local game store. I know Kill Team's very popular, 40K, BattleTech. I mean, they've got kind of nights there that they schedule with different games. So Big Flames of War community as well.
Because you had mentioned earlier, part of the reason you weren't able to jump into gaming earlier when you picked it up is there wasn't the community to be able to play games with. And I find, at least with many of the other one-page rules creators, a lot of them, they do solo battle reports, narrative solo ones, because they say it's tough finding a gaming community that either to play just in general, or to have someone be able to come and film with them. So it's always, I was just curious what the situation was like there.
Right. Yeah. For most of my battle reports, it is me and my son, but we talk about the moves obviously, and sometimes he'll want to do some stuff, and I have to say, "Hey, look, are you sure you want to do that?"
Right.
But
Coach him a little bit.
ultimately, if he says yes and he needs a 5 or 6 to make a shot, like I let him go with it, you know. So I want it to be his at the end of the day.
Outstanding. Well, any last parting words of wisdom before we call it a day here?
No, just appreciate the opportunity. It's always fun to get together and talk with like-minded people that enjoy war games, and I wish I had more people that came over to my house that shared the same enthusiasm that you do, and your community as well. So uh, I always love talking about it. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to come and join me here. So, to everyone else listening, go check it out. Miniature Game Montage is the name of the channel and the website. Especially if you're looking for some great ideas and bat reps for skirmish games, narrative focus, check them out. Until next time, everybody, keep your dice on the table, and we'll see you on the next one.